Everybody, welcome back to Final Resonance TV and episode number 9 of Van Halen Stories. Today, my guest is Steve Rosen, esteemed guitar journalist. Has interviewed folks like Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, and of course Edward Van Halen. We're talking about mostly today in his new book called ToneChaser, which is an awesome name and something that Edward, talked about himself being quite a bit. So that's it. How did you come up with the title?
Well, first off, man, thanks for having me. I really do appreciate that.
Sure.
I had kicked that title around for a long time, and I'm big on titles. I'm also a songwriter, so I have like pages of song titles, and stuff that hits me a certain way. So I really messed around a lot trying to come up with a title. What I did not want to do, and it's fine that other guys did that, is take the name of a Van Halen song and call the book that. It works. It just seems like, well, that's maybe the easy way out. Mm-hmm. So, the first working title that I had was A Life Was His, as in, what a life he led, trying to be a little poetic. And I don't think people quite got it, and it just didn't roll off the tongue right. So I knew somewhere in there I wanted to let people know that, it was sort of my story about Edward. So I kind of came up with my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. So I knew that was going to be in there. So I'm working on the book, and in 2003, which is one of the last interviews I did with him, he's talking, and was another late night conversation. And I was asking him what he was doing. I can't remember the context at this point, but he says, yeah, man, I'm a tone chaser. I'm always going after tone, that elusive thing. And when I came to that spot, when I heard that on the tape, I go, oh my God, there's my title. Mm-hmm. Guys have suggested, well, doing something with Brown sound. It's like, to me, that was too on the money. That was a little too easy as well. Mm-hmm. But, ToneChaser, I just thought was so fantastic. And the thing that I loved about it is that it was such an eloquent way for him to describe what he did. It's not like he said to me, oh yeah, man, I'm always looking for the next cool guitar sound, man, got new pickups and working on new. It wasn't anything that, fixed. It was just thing, ToneChaser. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. And beyond that, he had never, ever used that description of what he did in any interview we'd done. Mm-hmm. And by 2003, I'd interviewed him, I don't know, 50 times, 40 times. Dozens and dozens and dozens of hours. And he never used that word. And I've never read it in any other interview by any other writer. Mm-hmm. So I think, to be honest, and if somebody has it in their interview and you can prove me wrong, I think that's the one and only time he ever used that description. And I just thought it was so perfect. And it wasn't that the phrase itself was original. But it was certainly original in terms of Edward, talking about, the way he was always going after that Brown sound. So yeah, I love that title as soon as I heard it. And what I did was it sort of combined it into one word. It's obviously it's two words, but I thought as one word, it takes on even a little bit more mystique and has a little bit more of this magical thing about it. So
yeah, ToneChaser. I think later he described himself that in some of the promotional things he did with the Wolfgang guitars and that kind of thing. But I don't remember that phrase being used, like you said, anytime when you were talking about that, way back.
Oh.
Just much later.
He actually...
Yeah, he used it.
I'm sorry, man. So he actually did use that in talking about the Wolfgang guitars?
Yeah, when he released them in 2007, he called himself a tone chaser in the videos for the promotional stuff. That was like 2007. That was much later. So I don't remember that either until these videos that he put out himself with the EVH campaigns. Yeah, so there was one point of that, but
interesting.
That's it's a cool, like you said, a cool word and a good way to, like, you boil it down. And I don't know where he came up with that. You have any idea at all?
I honestly don't, man. And that's what was so shocked me, that it was just not typical of his speech pattern. You know, for him to say that, it just, you know, it's like came out of this other place. And I don't know where he had that in his head.
But it says it all, and that's really cool. One of the things I wanted to go back, you know, I have this Van Halen movie or documentary in my head, and where it starts is the Day on the Green show in 1978. And Josh Obrecht and yourself were there, as well as Niels Lozauer, right?
Yep.
And so, and Ross Halfin, I don't think he was there.
Honestly, I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't think he was.
Yeah, but he mentioned it in his new book. That's why I'm bringing that up. Because he saw it as sort of a flashpoint for Van Halen's, you know, first major festival, where they had a huge audience, almost 60,000 people. And you were there. Yeah. And can you describe that day a little bit? I mean, I know you're going to talk about it in your book, but is there something, you know, like with Josh and you, there was that moment where all of a sudden Edward was getting some attention, and all of a sudden he just explodes into the consciousness of the world through you guys, through your interviews. And I just wonder what that day was like. Maybe you just even describe the concert.
You know, it's funny because the only reason I was there was Guitar Player magazine has sent me up there to interview Mick Jones. You know, Foreigner was playing. You know, their first record had come out, and I mean, they were getting huge. I mean, they had all those monster singles by then. Mm-hmm. So Jim Crockett, the editor for Guitar Player, said, "Hey, man, you want to go up to Oakland and interview Mick Jones?" I said, "Hell yeah!" I mean, I thought that was going to be fantastic. You know, and I mean, I must have known, you know, that Van Halen was playing, but I honestly had no intentions of, not interviewing him, but even hanging out with him. So I'm kind of backstage, and there's like a common compound, and all the bands can kind of, intermingle, and then each band has sort of their own little section. And I see Niels Lozauer, and I didn't know that Loz was going to be there. And he and I had been friends by 78 for probably 3 or 4 years by then. And so he sees me and goes, "Hey man, I'm going to shoot Van Halen. I'm going to shoot Edward backstage. You want to come along?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And the whole day, and I can picture it in my head, was kind of surreal, because I had first met Edward. I think it was probably about a year earlier, June of 77. So I meet him at the Whiskey and we talk, and, for me, I thought we became friends at that moment. At least that's what I felt like. And then I interviewed him. I did a phoner, December of 77, before the first record comes out. And so when I meet him again for the second time at the Day on the Green, which I think was in June 78, July 78.
July 23rd. So, right? July 23rd, 1978.
There you go. So it's almost a year that I've met him, and I'd actually spoken to him again on a phone interview, 6 months earlier. But when I went back to his compound, and Neil was taking photos, I don't think Ed, in my memory, I don't think Ed remembered who I was. Mm-hmm. And it's impossible for me to remember if I said, "Hey man, I met you at the Whiskey and I interviewed you on the phone a few months ago." And so Neil introduced me to Edward, and I just kind of played along because I'd already met him and interviewed him. But honestly, I don't think Ed remembered. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. And that would be a thread that would go through our entire relationship. He never remembered something that may have happened a week before. He didn't remember those things. Big events, something that I was involved in and he was there. But anyway, so we hung out and he was amazing. And AC/DC opened that show. AC/DC were on their first tour of America and nobody knew who they were really. So I was backstage. I wanted to see Van Halen play. So, you can kind of hear the band in the background. So I can hear that AC/DC is finishing, there's no more music. And, Ed has to kind of get going, he's got to, he spent time and Neil's taking some photos, and taking some shots of Edward and me. Ed has to go, get ready for the show. And I wanted to go back out to front. I wanted to watch the show. So as I'm walking out to see the show, a publicist grabs me and says, "Hey, do you want to interview AC/DC?" And to be honest, I was never an AC/DC fan. They just didn't do much for me. I would have much rather have seen Van Halen play. And I thought, well, okay, sure, I'll go back. So I go, and I go back to AC/DC's compound and I'm there with Angus. And then I probably told the story before, but this guy comes over and there's like picnic tables. And this guy jumps up on the picnic table, man, and he's drinking and he is fucked up. And I'm thinking, Angus, why don't you get rid of this guy? We're talking. I mean, this guy's not bothering you. And Angus is like oblivious to it. And I'm about to say, dude, I'm talking to Angus Young. Could you please leave me alone? So he gets off the table and he sits down next to Angus. He goes, "Oh, I'm Bon Scott." I'm going, oh my God. I didn't know what he looked like. I had no idea. He actually turned out to be a very sweet guy. So honestly, I didn't see any of the show. I didn't see Van Halen. I was kind of hanging out backstage. I mean, I may have walked out to see, who was it? Aerosmith, maybe a little bit of Pat Travers. I did see Foreigner, and they were extraordinary. And then I interviewed Mick after their set. That was the thing, in the book. I mean, I saw Van Halen, I don't know, 10 times, 15 times. I cannot remember any of those shows. I couldn't tell you, what guitar Edward was playing or, what song did they open with or what the stage. I just cannot, I didn't have that kind of a memory. Giving myself a little bit of, leeway here. I was seeing concerts constantly. I mean, I'd been to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and sure. I can't remember any of them. Sure. Which isn't like, I'm not proud of that. It's just just the way it was,
So
I wish I could.
1977 though. You saw Van Halen though with the whiskey, right? So there is another interesting point. I do not remember what date or even what month I first saw Van Halen, because when I first met Ed in July, I think it was July '77. Cheap Trick were recording a live album at the Whiskey, and I thought, I want to go see that. Went with my brother. I know for a fact I hadn't seen Edward before then. I interview him again in December of '77. It's like a couple of months before the first record comes out. And I think I saw him somewhere in there. But, you can go online now and you can see all the Whiskey shows and you can see who played. And there's like not a show in there that they played that made sense that I would have been at. Edward asked me that question. He goes, "Oh, you first saw us at the Whiskey?" I go, "Yeah, I saw you at the Whiskey." I mean, honestly, I don't know where I first saw them. I know it wasn't the Starwood. And I'm pretty positive it wouldn't have been, in a bigger venue. So I know it was the Whiskey. I just, for the life of me, cannot remember when. There was an interview I did, and I can't remember if it's that interview I did from December '77, but I reference, the hollowed out bombshell he had. And the only way I would have known about that is if I had seen them.
I don't think that, I would have heard somebody talking about it and I would have asked them about that. You know what I mean? I would have to have seen that. Hey, man, what's a bombshell? Oh, it's my Echoplex, blah, blah, blah. So I probably saw him somewhere between July and December of 77, but I have no idea kind of the month or when it was. Which is really weird, but.
You don't recollect much about it then, as far as seeing the show or whatever. I don't.
I don't. I can remember Edward turning around. I remember that much.
Okay.
You're talking about the whiskey show?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him turning around. I thought, why is he doing that? I mean, I didn't even know why he was doing that.
So he was honestly, he was tapping. He was turning around and tapping. Is that what you think it was?
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate about when he started that tapping, because there's a lot of bootlegs out there where you can kind of go back and reference the time periods and kind of try to match up when that happened, when he started using that technique exactly. It seems like it was in late 77, 78. But the record wasn't recorded until October of 77, and I'm
sorry, his first record.
Yeah, the first.
I'm sorry, it was February 78.
Yeah, it came out in February 78, but it was started recording in 77 October.
Oh, right, you're right.
Yeah, so there's this period in between, like 6 months, where they have been signed, but Ted Templeman was busy, and they were kind of in the middle of this dead spot. And they had some shows in there. Right. And it seems like from around the beginning of 77 to this October point, he kind of either finalized what he was doing with that or he was working on it. But you hear the eruptions in 77 and you don't really hear in the early part of the year him tapping, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, man, that's really interesting because I asked him about that specifically. I asked him a couple times. I said, Ed, was the tapping thing, was it kind of, something you were thinking about and then it just kind of happened? Do you remember when? And he didn't have a clue. I think I might even ask him if he was tapping when they were still playing Gazaris. And I think he said he wasn't doing it then. But, you ask these guys those kinds of questions. And for the rest of the world, and you guitar maniacs,
right?
Who look on that as a pivotal point. And I get that. I mean, I completely understand that. Right. It's important for Edward. Like you say, it could have been that, he was messing around with it and he didn't want to bring it out until he at least, had a pretty good understanding of what it was he was doing. But, you ask guitar players, well, man, how did you do that? Or how did you get your sound? Or how do you describe your sound? And none of these guys, none of them have the kind of answer that you think you'd get from them. Like, well, man, I really worked really hard working on the blues scales, and then that morphed into using the little pinky, and it's never anything that. Guys like maybe Steve Vai and those kinds of guys who think that way. Right. But everybody else, all these guys, it's just this organic thing that happens. They can no more describe how they play something or why they play something. They can tell you, well, why I breathe. It's just there.
Right.
So, I would ask Edward those kinds of.
Yeah, you're a guitar player, so you know how when you're working on your craft, your kind of headspace is not. You're not thinking too much. You're just kind of working the craft, right? So you're not internalizing that kind of thought pattern the way you were trying to do these things. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure.
And when I would ask Edward those types of questions in general, he would, usually give me like a 2-word answer. I don't know, man. What do you call it? He goes, man, you're getting into 20 questions now. And I write about that in ToneChaser. It's like when he said 20 questions, I go, oh God, that's forbidden territory. You know, he doesn't, it's being too specific. You know, he didn't, you know what I mean? He didn't think like that.
Let me ask you about that interview you did. And this is kind of like the famous interview that everybody talks about, the one where he's playing your guitar. You know, one of the things that I noticed about this interview where he's playing and he's showing you the songs and showing you some of the techniques is, I don't know how, Steve, but it does sound electrified, but it's not, right?
Well, I have always maintained that Ed, man, he was just playing this 66 Strat that I had unplugged. But I know exactly what you're saying. And I'm telling you, man, when he picked up the guitar, it was just a remarkable thing. In my hands, it sounded like an electric guitar not plugged in. In his hands, it sounded like an electric guitar unplugged that sounded like it was plugged in. My point being, could he have been plugged into an amp, at a low volume? I just don't think so. I mean, I write about it, I had a Marshall, and I know he wasn't plugged into the Marshall, because the Marshall was like in the corner of the room. That means a cable would have had to come all the way from the top of the Marshall. I had both calves, into the, and I know there's no way. And then I think I had another little amp, and I can never remember what I had. It was either an Ampeg, little VT40, most probably that, which is actually a pretty cool little amp. And, which would have been like just across the room. I lived, the front room of my little guest house up in Hollywood Hills was pretty small, so that, I don't know what's that, 10 feet across the room or whatever. Could he have been plugged in and just the volume turned down low? It's possible, but I really don't think so. Yeah. Because I think had he been plugged in, he wouldn't have turned the volume down on the guitar. I think the volume on the guitar would have been all the way up, and he probably would have gone over and cranked the volume on the amp. So I think it's just him, just that thing that he had in his hands.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say exactly what you're talking about. His hands. I mean, when you hear that with the attack, a lot of people, like I interviewed Chris Gill. And he said Eddie hit the strings really hard, which for how he plays and what came after him, everybody went to sort of high gain, high sustain, light touch, which is seems to be the opposite of what his hands were like, based upon that interview and that guitar. In the way it sounded like his hands had the sustain in them, like they were the amplifier. Yeah. And Chris goes into that a little bit about the way that he handled the guitar. And I've seen a few videos of him. Like there's one out there that he sent somebody for a guitar he was giving away, and he's playing Unchained on it, and he's playing it acoustically like that, and you hear that attack in his hands even when he was older. So it was just a very magical kind of thing.
It was, man. And again, I write about it in the book. I was shocked when I saw how hard he played and how heavy his pick attack was. I mean, I could not believe it. I mean, it was ferocious, and even, his single note stuff, man, he attacked the stuff, the strings. It was amazing. I was blown away when I saw that. And then, he's, when he was up the house, then he did the flutter, his hummingbird thing. And that was a really, really light attack, that was like barely hitting the strings. And,
right. Maybe it's just because he varied. He has so many different tools in his arsenal, from the hard attack to, like you said, with the light touch. He had all kinds of different things. One of the things that you had mentioned, and he showed you in this, which I love this lick myself. It's the end lick, and You Really Got Me. This really fast, crazy lick that I've tried to master my entire life. And you hear it on the end of that song, and you're just like. And you hear it in that interview, And it's just an amazing amount of facility and chops, man. It's just crazy.
It's unbelievable, and obviously that's Edward's lick and he conjured it, but then to kind of hear him play it again, it's like, I mean, it's a lick that you've never heard before. And all the recorded history of electric guitar, you've never, ever heard that. And those last, those last 4 or 5 notes, I just suffered. Oh my God. You know what I'm talking about. And every guitar geek out there knows what I'm talking about. Those, and he'd end some of his solos, with a couple of notes, or he'd start with a couple of those, real cinematic notes. And, it was just amazing. And when I'm sitting there and watching him play, and he, comes those last notes, it's like, oh my God,
that's crazy.
This guy.
So Zlozauer did your back cover, which you said is as a picture from Day on the Green, and the other interviews, right? That we haven't seen.
Well, I'm gonna interrupt for 1 second. I'm gonna give away a little secret. It's a picture that nobody has ever seen.
Right.
It is from Day on the Green, but no one has ever seen this one.
Right.
So yes, and they're both Zlozauer shots.
Yeah, and Zloz is, he's the iconic early Van Halen photographer. I have all his books, of course, and all of the stuff that he has. One of the things I wanted to ask you that I try, to look at all these other interviews and find things that nobody talked about. And one of the things I'm fascinated with is the story that you told about riding in his Countach. Now, Eddie had this black Countach. I've only seen a couple pictures of this thing. There's only a few photos of it out there, but you rode in the black Countach. Is that right?
That was it.
Yeah.
I did.
Tell me about that ride. This is a Guitar Center ride, right? You go to the Guitar Center in a black Countach.
So, I mean, the whole episode was so unbelievable. Here we are talking about this astonishing guitar player who is changing everything about electric guitar, and we're up at 5150, and he's changing strings on a guitar, or he's taking the strings off a guitar. He wanted to restring it, and he goes and he's got 5150 was stocked like the greatest guitar store you've ever seen, right? I mean, he had everything. I'm not talking about the outboard and recording gear and guitars and mics and amps, but I'm talking about nuts and bolts and screws and guitar picks and bridges. And so he goes back to a cabinet. It's open. He's looking around. I'm trying to think, well, what is he looking for? And he comes back. He says, I don't have any guitar strings. And I'm thinking, that's pretty funny, Ed. That is really funny, man. Come on, put on the guitar strings. I want to hear you play. And he goes, no, man, I don't have any guitar strings. He says, let's go to Guitar Center. And I thought, I couldn't have written that scenario any more perfectly, right? I mean, does that not encapsulate who this guy is? I mean, on every level, he's got everything that a guitar player could ever want, and he doesn't have a set of strings. He's got 80 other guitars there that he could play, and no, he's got to play that guitar with a new set of strings on it. Why his office manager didn't have strings in there, that's I can't even begin to think. So we go outside, and my car's there. I would pull in, the gates, and my car was there. I think I was driving a Mazda RX-7. Mm-hmm. It was a decent car, and I see him, starting to get in the Countach. I think, oh my God, it's going to be unbelievable. So, the scissor doors come up, and, he kind of jumps in, and I'm waiting my side door comes up, and I'm trying to get in, and I can't get in, or I can't get the door up, or it won't. And he's sitting there, he's got the radio on, and he's already got the engine going. And I'm trying to say to myself, Be cool. Let him know that you've driven in a Countach before, which I never had. I mean, how many people have?
Right.
And I'm telling you, man, I could not open this fucking door. Comes like this. He goes, oh, you have to push down, then pull up and pull it wide. I'm going, I'm going. Then, oh, Jesus, God. He's just going to leave me there, I finally get it open. Then getting into the Countach, because it's low and I'm trying to put one foot in, I can't get the other thing in. Then I get in and I can't close the fucking door, He was the most patient dude, man. And I mean, just as something simple as that, he could have said, come on, man, just get in the car. And I would have shriveled up. But he never said that. He just smoking a cigarette and he's just waiting for me to get in. Yeah, I mean, it was just so amazing. So I finally get in, man. And unfortunately, Guitar Center on Ventura was only, God, I don't know. It probably wasn't more than 3 or 4 miles from his house. So it wasn't a long ride, man. But he goes screaming. It's like this private drive. And then he gets down to Coldwater and he bangs the left. And then he gets down to Ventura and he bangs left, man. And I mean, he was flying. I mean, it was unbelievable, man. I thought, oh, God, let somebody I know see me. Anybody,
Right.
It was amazing. And then everything that happens at Guitar Center, and I'm going to save that.
Okay, save that. But I heard he's a crazy driver. Everybody always says when they go for a ride with Ed, it was a fast ride.
It was insane,
Let's talk about Don Landy. A lot of people want to know. We all want to strap Don Landy down to a chair and exercise everything he ever knew, but he will not speak. Can you explain his personality and his genius? Because apparently, there was a lot of talk about the recordings over the years, which ones they liked, didn't like. A lot of that was in your interviews on the recordings. Mike was talking about that in his interviews, and Ed talked about that. But there was something that Don brought to that. Maybe you can expand upon it.
I think I have a fairly good insight about that. And again, I write about it in the book. Ed would always talk about Don. And I had once described Don as, so he's sort of your interpreter. He goes, yeah, that's it exactly. So, I mean, you heard it with Edward playing my Strat unplugged. It was Edward Van Halen. I mean, he could have plugged into my Ampeg to some Marshall he'd never plugged into. He could have plugged into a Twin. He was going to sound like Edward Van Halen, right? Mm-hmm. But Don, Don was the guy who I asked him, I said, so Don's the guy who puts it all on tape? He goes, yeah, Don's the guy. And I said, if Don hadn't been around, would things be different? He goes, yeah, a lot different. So Ed always recognized what Don did. Don was a genius. I mean, he really was. I mean, he'd be up there at 5150 and Ed and I'd be talking and Don would be, working on some software program or tweaking something in the board or doing this or that, Don was integral to Edward's sound. And more than that, Don was the type of personality. I mean, he loved Edward. I mean, he truly revered the guy and would have done anything for him. And I mean, Edward recognized that, and they had an amazing relationship. When Don stopped working with the band, I thought I was a little shocked, to be honest. Yeah. But yeah, Don was a huge part of that. I always likened Don sort of as I'm mixing sort of producers and engineers here, but kind of what George Martin brought to the Beatles, or Jeff Emmerich, who engineered the Beatles. Would the Beatles have sounded like the Beatles without Jeff Emmerich? Yeah, I mean, would those songs have been there? Yeah, but would they have sounded that way? Probably, not exactly like that, or, some engineers known for working with certain bands, over the course of their careers, and the parts they play. Don was an extraordinarily quiet guy. But we got along. We actually got along really well. And I actually reached out to Don when I was writing the book. And I'm not going to tell you what he said because it was so cool, and you can read about it. But I was really moved by what he said. Mm-hmm. And in the same way that I was, Don was really protective of Edward. I mean, not physically so much as emotionally, and he wanted to give Edward everything Edward wanted. Mm-hmm. Edward wanted. The guitar sound tweaked. You know what I mean? That was critical to Don, and he lived and breathed that. It was a magical, one in a lifetime relationship. That those guys kind of found each other. Definitely.
Yeah. I always wonder, because there's probably no other human on planet Earth that spent more time besides his brother with Edward Van Halen than Don Landy.
No, that's true.
Would that have to be true, right? He was with him almost all the time, recording all the time.
Yeah. No. He was probably even more than Valerie. I mean, I don't mean to be glib about it, but Edward worked till 5 a.m. Go in the house and sleep for a couple hours, then go back outside and start working again. I'm sure Don was there, virtually all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I tried to sit Don down a couple times and kind of talk, and he was just reluctant. He just didn't want to, because it wasn't about him, and I think he didn't see a reason why.
So that's why he's
Don
reluctant. He's reluctant in general to come talk about the details.
Yeah, he is. And he was there, some of the people listening might, know about the Guitar Center when Ed was inducted into the Rock Walk.
Yeah.
And Don was there that night. I was like, my God, blown away that Don had came. I think Don came, one to, be with Edward, but, Les Paul was going to be there, and, some heavy people. And I think Don wanted to see that. Don participated in the sort of the interview that I put together with Edward and Les. And, that was fantastic. Having Don there, and I talked to Don afterwards. And this isn't part of the Guitar World story, so this is kind of some extra stuff in the book that I was talking with Don after the interview with Les and Edward ended, and some really cool stuff. Yeah, man, he's just this reluctant, quiet guy who just did these amazing things, and crafted, one of the most amazing guitar sounds anyone's ever heard.
I tell you what, when you listen to, now I just listened to it through my studio monitors in here. I've got 2 sets, but I was listening to this set the other day, and You Really Got Me. And the way that it's panned, the way that, he put things in the stereo, like he had the guitar, like we know it's hard right or whatever, hard left, but he put the vocals and things just, he, as far as panning and that kind of thing, Don did some stuff in that is now really commonplace, to use the full width, that kind of thing. So some very cool things that we'd love to, find out from him where he came up with those ideas or whatever. But let me ask you about some of these interviews with Mike and Dave. I really enjoyed those. The 1980 interview with Dave, the interview with Mike was mind-blowing and revealing in every possible way. And what I loved about your interviews, is obviously you're doing this for guitar magazines, and the detail that Mike gets into about his basses and the sounds and the Jack Daniels bass and all those things in your interview, really cool things, really cool stuff that he talks about. But he was talking about his role in Van Halen was to be the anchor, to be that guy,
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool. And then the raw stuff. As he got older, he got less coherent. At least that's my opinion of how you would communicate. But in the early days, and
Dave? About Dave?
Yeah, Dave. He got more eccentric as he went. But in '80, he was still fairly clear about the recording process, the songs. One of my favorite parts of that interview where he talks about Van Halen. It's Van Halen. He's talking about, the Cradle of Rock and how that's going to change everybody's perception and all that. It's a very funny clip, of him talking about all that. But what did you know that Mike had such a hard, all the stuff he said, and Edward had a hard time with David Lee Roth. The creative part of that band obviously was Edward, and the business side of it, a lot of people said that was Dave or that was Al. What do you think?
I think a lot of the business side was Alex, and Edward talked about that, and he talks about it in the book, that Alex did a lot of things that nobody knew about, and that Alex was reluctant to take credit for it. Ed telling me, yeah, Al won't take credit, and he says to me, well, Ed, you don't take credit for a lot of stuff you do, so why should I take credit for that? But yeah, Al was a huge part of that. Al was Edward's anchor. If Edward ever really kind of needed something, or some stabilizing thing, he always found that in Al. I asked him, I said, so you've never played with another drummer? He goes, no. Me and Al from the very beginning, which is pretty telling, because we know about brothers and bands,
sure,
Davies Brothers and the Kinks, Robinson Brothers and Black Crows. Sure, they're not pounding on each other; they're yelling at each other. But which isn't to say that Alex and Edward didn't, have their squabbles. They did. They were completely different people. But yeah, Al had a lot to do with that. And Dave had a lot to do with the creative, sort of that whole marketing thing. How the band should look, and the videos, and
right.
Edward was always quick to give Dave his props for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of, why I called the book, subtitle Understanding Edward, is that he was an extraordinarily understanding individual. He may not have gotten along with Dave, and they butted heads musically, and they weren't friends, and they never were, even from day one. But Edward always recognized how important Dave was to the band and the creative thing. And he said that Dave always carried his weight. So, Edward could be really, really mad at you, but still recognize, what you brought to the band or brought to the music. He never said like, "Oh, Dave doesn't do shit." He writes lyrics and he doesn't do anything. He never said that.
Yeah, in your interview,
moments.
In your interview with Eddie in '86, I think it was, when you did all that successive interviews with Mike and Eddie, right? In '86, Mike, and those were different, like days apart, a day apart or something, right?
I think Edward was the first day, and then Mike was the second day. Yeah.
Okay, so you get this story from both sides about Dave, and Mike's version of it is much harsher than Eddie. Yeah. And Eddie, like you said, all through Eddie's interview, which I kind of was contrasting those two interviews, thinking, wow, Eddie really, like you said, they fought, but he also recognized Dave's good points. I didn't really feel that way about what Michael had to say at all. He was severely beaten up at that point, and you've been around this business, and I've been in bands for years. You know how hard it can be with relationships in bands. It can be brutal. And I understand.
Oh my God, you kidding?
I know where Mike's coming from. It can be mentally abusive, as Mike was kind of alluding to there. But Edward didn't really seem to be, even though Mike said that Edward took it really hard. Edward didn't say that outright.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and. There are some conversations in the book where Edward is really honest about that relationship with Dave. Makes Mike's interview look
Okay.
You know, like milk toast. I mean, Ed. You know, he was really. I mean, I remember that. Yeah, he was very sort of played it close to the vest in terms of, you know, what the things he said about Dave.
But you know, when they got back together in 2007 to go back out on tour, there were statements made by Edward where he said things like, you know, people gravitate towards this version of Van Halen, or for some reason he came to peace with the difference between the two of them and was able to make it work somehow and do those last tours. And of course he was talking about doing a tour with everybody at the end there. But he did recognize the kind of what made them them. I mean, you know, I think it's really cool that when I think about Van Halen, when I first started listening to Van Halen, some of the things that really got me were the little musical interludes. You always had like Mean Streets or the Spanish Fly or this or that and the other. But on the other side of that, you had Dave with his one-liners in the songs, you know, with the little. That was just unique to that band. Nobody had done those kind of things, and they had set this new. It was just a super creative thing that they did together.
No, it absolutely was. I mean, I think they became, you know, the blueprint for what a heavy rock band would become. I mean, yeah, right. I mean, Edward, you know, influenced every guitar player to come after him. Mm-hmm. Strangely, you don't hear a lot of people saying, well, David Lee Roth, you know, you don't hear other singers saying, well, David Lee Roth was one of my main influences, or Michael Anthony was one of my main bass influences.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that they weren't for a lot of, you know, bass players and singers, but it was that dynamic, you know, and all those amazing bands had that, right? You know, The Who, Daltrey and Townsend, and
sure.
See, there it's a little bit different because Pete is writing everything, right? So he's writing lyrics and melodies, so it's a little bit different, but still, you know, Daltrey and Townsend, you know, were constantly at each other's throats. The Stones. You know, I mean, Jagger and Richards, my God, you know, Aerosmith, you know, Joe and Steven Tyler.
I saw some crazy.
You know, man, you kind of, you kind of, you know, maybe that's what those bands at that level, they feed on that. But, you know, I stopped basically hanging out with Ed in 2003. So when they did that reunion tour, you know, it had been several years since we spoke. When I heard that he was going out with Dave, I thought, there is no way. And when you read these things in the book, which goes back, and you brought it up too, man, which goes back to the title of my book, Understanding Edward. He was an understanding soul. All the shit that Dave did to him. Mm-hmm. And he was willing to say, hey, you know, I want to go out and play. And I know people want to see the original band, or, you know, with Wolf or whatever that was, you know, and he was willing to do that. I think Ed just wanted to play, you know, he just wanted to play out, but I'm astonished by it. Really.
Well, maybe it was his son. You know, maybe it was Wolfgang. Maybe he wanted to go do that with Wolfgang.
Yeah. You know, I absolutely. I have no doubts that was a huge reason for it.
And they made it work. I mean, and it was good. And one thing, though, you were going to say, though, because you were saying how you were blown away, right? And how hard that would be, or maybe something wouldn't work. I went to the very first show because I thought there wouldn't be a second show.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's how bad it was, and you know, somehow they made it work all the way to 2015, and that blew me away. Still, you know, you're talking about your unfortunate situation with Edward, with the misunderstanding. Now, this is something that your book, you said, Understanding Edward. Grover Jackson had a very similar situation with Edward. There was a very minor from how he described it, minor misunderstanding, something he was trying to get Edward to try a piece of gear, and then all of a sudden it turned out to be like an insult, and then Edward just was done with him, and it was, Grover to this day, when he talked to me about it, he still doesn't know what happened. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's something that was a pattern. I don't know what happened, why Edward would do that, because I've met Edward. He's was a very nice person to me, very warm, very, very cool, and everything that I expected. But yeah, it's just so weird that those things would happen with him. I never, you said that it was going through that rough period when he started into that rough period. But this with Grover was way back. This was way back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would, it's hard to understand that. Maybe in your book that you kind of go there.
I knew the relationship between Edward and Grover, and I knew Grover, and I know what he told me. I never knew exactly what caused that. Was it a simple misunderstanding, some little thing? Probably. I mean, Ed would just pick up on certain things, and I had no idea why. I mean, in our conversations, I would say something, and he somehow thought I was not insulting him, but he would talk about a solo, and in my head I'm thinking, or he's playing the song, thinking, this is like I've never heard anything like this in my life, and that's what I want to say to him. Right. But he also did not take compliments well. When I would tell him, "Oh, Jesus, Ed, that is just unbelievable," yeah, it's neat. His word for something that he thought was really good was neat. Yeah, man, it's neat. That's about as, hyperbolic as he ever would get in terms of describing his own playing. Yeah, man, it's neat. Yeah, it was a neat solo, And so I would, I'd go off the deep end and throw all these adjectives at him. And he was almost like he didn't need to hear it. He didn't need that part of him fed like that. I would just say innocuous things, or just the way I would phrase a question, and I could see it. I could feel it, I knew him pretty well, and I could see that, if I said something, and I could tell by his response that, and to my mind, it was just the most innocuous thing. Or if I laughed, if he said something and he had this very deadpan sense of humor, and he would describe something, and I kind of go, like, oh my God, I get it, Ed, I know what you're saying. But he somehow thought the laugh was like ridiculing him, or that I didn't believe what he was saying. And he'd go, no, really, that's what I mean. And I go, Ed, you know what I mean? So it was weird. So in answer to your question, I don't have any idea what could have triggered that. I know Grover, I knew him pretty well, and I knew what he thought of Ed. And I think he would have walked over broken glass to have done anything Edward wanted. Mm-hmm. So, could Grover have done something that egregious? It's probably highly unlikely. Yeah. Was it a misunderstanding? Yeah.
Well, he told me that.
Something to do with.
Yeah, he told me it was just a simple thing, and then he just he just told me straight up, and I was like, wow, that seems kind of weird, but and that's a pattern that not just with you or him. I mean, we know that from a lot of other people. But one of the things that I want to ask you about him is somebody who's been on the inside of 5150, and you describe it so well that it was a pigsty. Other people have been a little bit, I don't know, they've said similar things. It was a man cave, right?
Oh my God. He hid out there, man. It was his thing.
So when you say hid out there, this is my question. Was Edward a reclusive person, because, on one hand, you're driving down to Guitar Center with him in the Countach, and he just does this. And people say they saw him everywhere around his house, Ralph's or wherever, everywhere around there. He was out and about. But there's a part of me that felt like, he always talked about being in the studio all the time. And we know that's true. Did you feel like he was sheltered, or he felt like he needed to be reclusive, or he couldn't deal with the constant attention? Or
yeah, I think he felt like that a lot. I definitely got that from him, and he told me that he didn't like crowds, didn't like going out because it was a thing. And he talks about it in the book. It's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. But then he'd get in the car and drive to Guitar Center in a fucking Countach. I know he had some other cars there, and they're all probably flat. I don't know if he had the VW that was painted like his guitar, or I'm sure he had some more modest car. I mean, they're taking my car. Right. Once he walked into Guitar Center, that was an entirely different story, of course. But I think for him, he thought, that's nothing special. That's no big deal. But and you'd see him. He'd go out to some concerts, and we went to a couple, and those are some pretty fun stories. But yeah, I think he was really, he led a pretty cloistered life, and that he was never ever so happy as when he was making music. Mm-hmm. I talk about going to some NAMM shows with him.
Right, the NAMM show.
yeah, and that was fun. That was incredibly fun. But I can tell you that Edward was also miserable a lot during that. He was drunk, and did he drink because he felt uncomfortable being out amongst people? I don't know. I don't know.
Over the years, I'm a previous employee of a music store, and was at NAMM every year forever, and have been for the last 30 years or whatever. So I saw Edward at NAMM in '87, with Steve Stevens, and I saw him a few years later with Albert Lee and Steve Morris, and I would see him in those situations, and it seemed to deteriorate over time. He seemed to get more and more uncomfortable. Yeah. Of course, he was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and he couldn't go walking around after a certain point, and then he just wouldn't come at all. And, so he would only come on dealer days and meet the dealers or whatever. But, yeah, I knew that was a thing with him. And I think anybody that was at NAMM knew that he had a issue with that a lot of times with the crowds. And, God, can you imagine being him? I can't imagine that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, Ed endorsing Kramer guitars, I write about that in the book. He hated those moments. He really despised those moments. For him to, and again, he was so gracious. If you came up and you wanted an autograph and he was there, he wasn't going to say like, no, he never would do that.
Right.
So, he was signing stuff, but he hated those moments, and,
why do you think, that
I don't think
one of the things that I was going to say is when he was doing these, when I think back about his endorsement deals this is, before signature guitars was a thing. There was a period where Edward did not want anybody to have what he had. That was his thing. That was what he wanted. And there was a time when he could have sold, a bazillion guitars in the 80s. He could have done that in the 80s, but he didn't do it for 20 years after that. And you're talking about the 80s when this first started happening. There seemed to be just that uncomfortableness with him doing that at all. Like he just kind of didn't want to, but.
I write about that exact thing in the book, and I saw it over and over. I don't think Ed ever thought that, well, if I endorse if I put my name on that guitar for Kramer, what comes along with that? I don't think he ever thought about the NAMM show and do it, and had he known, would he have done it still? I don't know. I thought that was the biggest mistake he ever made,
right.
or one of them. I thought, why would you do that? It couldn't have been the money. I mean, I don't know how much Kramer could have paid him. It could have been millions. It still couldn't have been worth the money. It couldn't have been because of the money. I don't think he was ever motivated by that. I mean, certainly he wanted to make money. I mean, I'm not saying he was a monk, but I don't think he ever, did what he did because there was a paycheck at the end of it. But I thought, and I was there that night, and I write about it, when he decided to endorse Kramer, and he asked me, and I should have said, don't you fucking even get close, don't do it. And I never said anything. Right. I just felt that that's a line that I couldn't cross. And I'm sorry I didn't. Not that my opinion would have swayed in one way or the other, but I thought that was a horrific mistake. And it could have been any company, I mean, it could have been Gibson or Fender. Why would you do that? You are this boy genius, that you're building these guitars, and now you're going to go and have this. Why? Because you want all these people to have your guitar. I couldn't understand it.
Yeah. So do you think you don't? I mean, I think deep down inside he didn't really want to do that, but for some reason he was compelled to do it. Pressure from the outside or somewhere else.
He talks a little bit about that in the book, and
okay.
That's fine. I mean, it makes a little bit of sense.
I just think that whole thing, signing the deal with the devil. You better watch out what you get into, because it may turn into something that you didn't really plan on getting into, and it can be
definitely.
I was in the corporate world after I was in the music world, and I know that was not the path that I eventually ended up. I went back to music after multiple decades of doing that kind of work. It just wasn't for me. I mean, that wasn't my thing. So let me ask you about this Smithsonian, and what you knew about that thing at the Smithsonian, and what your reflection of that interview was, because one of the few times that he did that, if ever, where he actually did something like that.
Yeah. So by then, I mean, I hadn't spoken to him for years. When was that? When was that done?
2015.
2015. Yeah. So I hadn't, my relationship with him had ended 12 years earlier. And I kind of heard about it after the fact. I thought, well, if anybody was deserving of that, it was Edward. And you're right. It was the only time he did that. And part of me was shocked that he did that, because I just told you 5 minutes ago that in terms of that kind of praise and that, people looking at him like he was someone special, he never needed to hear that, never wanted to hear that. And the Smithsonian, that's all that was. I think because it was a Smithsonian, I mean, he recognized what that was. Somehow that was important to him. I was shocked that he did it. I never really saw the whole interview.
Yeah.
One thing that I talk about in the book several times is that he never had any sense of his own legacy, which goes back to me saying he didn't really need to hear what a great guitar player he was, or what a great, it just didn't matter to him. That's not what moved him. It's not what fed him. And he had no sense of his own legacy, or what he was doing or creating. And, I asked him once, I go, Ed, can you hear that, the influence you've had on other guitar players? And I wanted him to say, go into some deep thing about, and he goes, I hear the guy sounding like me, I don't particularly like it, but, some guys do it pretty well. In 1985, when I was going to write, and some of you may know this, some of you watching and listening, I was going to write Edward's autobiography. And so we sat down and we signed a contract, and for 4 years, I worked on that book, gathering interviews. And I could never get Edward to commit and sit down, because though I'd interviewed him many times before, excuse me, I needed to sit down with him and do interviews specifically for the book. I wanted to talk to him about his childhood, man. And, how much did your dad impact on you? The fact that he was a musician, and, what was your extended family like? And what was it like when you were in school, man? And were you good at, sports? And when did you start smoking? I mean, all those things that no one really knew about him back then. And to this day, really not many people do either, because those interviews never got done. And certainly some of that comes out, in some of these books, but to my mind, it didn't. They didn't go deep enough. So I realized what would happen was, and his patent excuse was, well, I don't feel it's the right time. Well, it was never the right time for him, because he didn't see specifically how important that book was. And I knew how important it was. And I'm not saying just because I was writing it, of course, that was a big part of it, but I knew that, who he was had to be written about. It had to be chronicled, it had to be documented. And he didn't see the need. And he'd always tell me, well, man, a book comes out on an artist when their career is over. I go, oh, no, Ed, that's not true at all. Why do you think that way? And I could never dissuade him from his opinion. So to get back to the Smithsonian, I think he realized this is important. This is a part of history, and I should go do this.
And he probably realized his health issues were mounting, and
could have been a part of it.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. I was at that thing, and I got, he had a greeting line that day, so he met everybody. There was a couple hundred people, and
I saw a little bit of that,
and it was pretty, he was very cordial to everyone, and I kind of watched it because I just wanted to watch, because I hadn't seen him interact with a lot of people. Obviously over the years he's done so much interaction with people that he didn't do it for 20 years. So this was one time that I thought, well, maybe I get to witness this, and he was at that seemed for the first time comfortable with this fan meet and greet kind of thing. I mean, he just was. He seemed at peace, if that makes sense, with the whole idea of having to, because here you got 200 people. Most of them were like me. They just wanted to say thanks, man. Thank you. And that's what you see in the video. A lot of people just all they wanted to do is just say thank you for what you did, man. And we all wanted, I think everybody that ever loved Edward wanted to say that to Edward. Thank you, man. Thank you for what you did, and for inspiring. The reason I'm talking to you today is because I saw the Unchained video in 1981, man, or I saw it a couple years later, and it changed my life. Just the video. I'd seen Kiss live, but Van Halen was something different. And when I heard him at the end of that video play some of those lines he played on that guitar, I was changed forever. And, it led me to a 40-year career in music. I'm no rock star, but I get to make a living playing guitar. And that's because of one dude. One dude's inspiration, man. It's just a powerful thing. And I'm glad you're writing a book about it so we can hear more and know more about him.
Well, I appreciate all that, man. And I understand how you were touched by that. I mean, I know there were a lot of people were touched by that, by him. He was a different kind of human being. I mean, and I've talked about it, and I write about it in the book, and I've met most of the great ones. Clapton is the only one I've never met. He's kind of the big zero in my list. I've never met Clapton, and he's the one I always wanted to talk to. Because I thought then I would have done Page, Beck, and Clapton. I haven't done the three guys. Right. But beyond that, I mean, I've met the Kings. These guys.
Malmsteen, Via, and on and on and on. All the guys that came after.
Exactly. And I've been around them when they were around other people, not a lot, but I could see that, and I could see how people responded to them, and that the reverence they had for them in their playing. But with Ed, it went beyond that. I mean, it was idolizing him. It was almost, and I don't want to offend anybody, it was almost religious. I mean, we loved Edward. We loved him. We didn't want anything to happen to him. And I don't know if I ever really saw that, and, I saw Zeppelin play 15 times, and yeah, they were screaming rabid fans. Did anybody ever think that? But, oh my God, Jimmy Page, I love him, and I don't want him to be hurt, and I want him to be safe. And I don't think so. I don't think people thought about, those people, or Jeff Beck or Pete Townsend. I mean, the greats, Dave Gilmour, on and on. Steve Vai. Steve has that a little bit, but nothing like Edward. And, and I sensed it the first time I met him. And,
he's like our family member. He there's something about
he is.
Maybe his, maybe this is something that when I first saw his smile, I think, before at that point in my life, we didn't have anything but Don Kirshner's rock concert, Midnight Special, ways to see these guys up close. And the way that he came across on that video, the joy that he exuded, the smile that he had when he played, and the sheer virtuosity of his playing. I mean, the other day, I was looking at that Unchained video, and it said, an 83-year-old woman said, "I'm an 83-year-old woman, and I just got chills watching this video. Rest in peace, Edward Van Halen." I mean, an 83-year-old woman commented on that just recently. And I was like, wow, man. All these other people had that same. It's like the Beatles when they came on Ed Sullivan. For a lot of people, that particular video. And it just inspired a whole generation.
I know.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable. And the few times that we were out, I saw that. I saw this reaction from people. They crowd around him. They wanted to touch his, the hem of his jacket. They just wanted to say hello. They wanted to keep that memory, and 50 years from then, they want to. I met Edward Van Halen. I get it.
But you got to sit there with him. You got to sit there with him for 20 years and absorb him. And this book, man, one of the things that came up in one of your interviews before, and I'll put this out there. I don't know that it's been put out there, but. I went right back to your interviews and started listening to try to absorb everything in those interviews that I have. And I know you got more, right, that you're going to put out someday, right? Maybe. If you don't do this interactive book
Maybe.
Thing. If you don't do this interactive.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about that one.
Yeah, you might should. That's pretty awesome. But there are other interviews that you don't have out there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, those midnight conversations you said.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you'll read about those. I mean, you'll read those in the book, but no one has ever heard. Well, no one's ever read them or heard them. Yeah, no, there's some pretty amazing stuff there. I think all you guys will dig it. I think you'll get
we'll eat it up.
I think you'll get a much better sense. My hope is that you walk away and you go, wow, I never knew that about him. I never thought about him in that way. And that was my intent, in writing the book, and, trying to be as honest as I could along the way. And, that wasn't an easy thing to do. And there's some dark stuff in there, but, if there's going to be light, there has to be dark about myself as well, and interacting with him, and, things that I made of, mistakes. And I was talking to him that I hinted at before, but,
I think that puts the reader in your shoes.
Exactly.
I think it's important that we're going to see this through your eyes, and feel your feelings about, like you said, how he would respond to you when you would do whatever. That's kind of what we want to. We want to be in your shoes and live it with you. And this is what this book does for us. It gives us that opportunity to live that 20 years with you.
That's exactly what it is. And that was not an easy thing to do. And I'm not talking emotionally, because that was difficult, but trying to recreate that feeling when he's sitting there on the couch playing my guitar, my Hollywood Hills little guest house, smoking this fucking cigarettes. I'm probably getting high, and asking for some potato chips. And, so how do I let that reader feel what I was feeling, and your heart beating like insanity, and trying to hold on to the reality that this is really happening. The guy's really there, and not just, not space out and just, not being able to absorb it all. So that was a difficult thing to do. I mean, I really worked really hard on doing that. And I think, these other books, Brad and Chris's book, I mean, and I said it over and over, and Brad has been incredibly generous with me. And I dealt with him when he was the editor at Guitar World, and actually got him one of the interviews with Edward. And, he was really supportive of me. He was supportive of all his writers, and he was great in his book and gave me an incredible kind of a shout out, and Chris. I mean, those guys are fantastic writers. Paul Brannigan is an amazing writer. I mean, these guys are excellent writers. But I think that it, they weren't sitting there with Edward, over the course of 20 years. They spent time with him, but I don't know if they actually bring you into those moments. I don't think their books were meant to do that. I think their books were more meant to inform. Right. I wanted you to, I want you to feel the fucking smoke getting in your eyes, man, and over the carpet, and almost triggering migraines in me, which I used to get. Cigarette smoke's about the worst thing you can be around if you're susceptible to migraine headaches, which I was back in the day, and not telling him that he couldn't smoke in my place. It's like, well, it's like, why, allowing him to smoke, which was, but so that's what I wanted you to do, man. I wanted you to feel what it was like to be there with him in those wonderful moments, in the sad moments, man. When he was buoyant, when he was down, when he was depressed, when he's going through these changes, and, the band wasn't, kind of there. And it's
right. A lot of people
that have a journey, man.
A lot of people that I have on this channel have had the opportunity to be at 5150 or be in his presence for a little while, but you really have the years of in the inner circle with Don and Ted Templeman, who, I from what I can gather, looking back at their demos back in the day, Ted Templeman really did shape that first album, and he really helped Roth get that thing to be the pop thing, the hooks. He made that transition from them to be that club band that was ultra powerful with his guitar player that blew his mind, to this thing where they had harmonies and they had this production, this whole vibe that they ended up coming out with. One person said they sounded like California to me. And that's kind of what when you're in the East Coast or the Midwest, when you hear Van Halen, you think parties out the West Coast, man. That's got to be where it's at.
Exactly. Yeah.
I really appreciate you, doing this book, ToneChaser. Y'all check out ToneChaser as soon as it comes out. You're working on the printing, what we were talking earlier. You want to talk about that a little bit? What's the time frame, printing, all that?
I do. So my original intent was to go out and try to find a publisher. To my dismay and chagrin, publishers weren't interested. The book was too long. I talk about me in there because it's, kind of, Edward and me, and, so stuff that's not strictly Van Halen related, more, a little bit about my career and, this and that. And they said, hey, we don't give a shit they didn't say it in those words, but we don't really care about you. You got to take out all that stuff. Nobody's going to want to read about you. It's too long. Make a long story short, through the urging of Neil Zlozauer, who's coming out with a new photo book called Ed by Zloz,
right.
300 of his most amazing color shots that no one has ever seen. Most of his stuff has never been published. And he told me, I contacted him and said, Neil, do you have some publisher contacts? I figured he would from his previous books. And he says, publisher, there's no advance, and you have no control, and I'm just printing it myself. You should print it yourself, which is something I'd never thought about. Cut to the chase. I ended up printing it myself, having it printed myself. I found this publisher, API. The guy's name is Robert Smith, monster Van Halen fan. He knew about my work and my relationship with Edward, said, I have to be involved in this book. This guy's been amazing. I had no idea what the turnaround time was for a printer once they got the files. Like everything else, it's got to be formatted, to a book-ready file format called InDesign. That's kind of the file that most people use. And I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to work that. Mm-hmm. So I was actually lucky enough to get Neil's art director, who put together Neil's upcoming book, Daniel Gray, who's a very talented guy. And he did the cover and he did the back cover. And so he's putting that together now. So, he's taken my manuscript, 258,000 words, and he now has to dump it into InDesign. And as some of you may know, when you read a book, the text is justified. That means it's lined up on the left, like it always is, but it's also lined up on the right, right? You don't have like an inch space open. The text goes all the way to that edge. Well, you've got to sit there and put in whatever the parameters are, and it takes time. So I'm hoping that he will be done. Where are we? The 24th? I was hoping it was going to be done by the end of this month. That's probably highly unlikely. I would say the middle of March, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. Once the printer gets it, it can take anywhere from 6 to 7 weeks. So what is that? Middle of March, April, May, middle of May, hopefully. Mm-hmm. Then the books have to get out to me, and I think the printer's back east somewhere. And this guy is so cool. He's going to drive the books out to me personally, which is pretty fantastic. That's why I'm always so vague when I put a post, and the time frame always gets back. But first I thought, I'll have the books by mid-March, and then it was mid-April, and that's mid-May, and I am going to try to get to the NAMM show, which this year is, I think, June 2nd, out in Anaheim, out here in California, right? Which is actually just up the street from me now. So I'm going to actually try to we're going to try to make that deadline. I can't be any more precise than, God, I don't know, man. End of May, I'm hoping,
cool. But
what I will do, all the pre-orders, I will then send out the books in sort of a chronological order. Those who kind of ordered first, have that set up so those people get the books first. And it's a long road, man. I knew it'd be challenging. I had no idea how challenging, but I'm really happy. When I get to interact with every single person who sends in an order, man, and some of the things these people write in the little PayPal notes thing, and hey, man, we've read your interviews and thank you for doing this book. And it's like, that means so much to me. It really means a lot. So, that's great. And, having control over what the book is going to look like and the font and being able to choose the pictures and the front and back covers and stuff. So, man, I think the book's going to be pretty fantastic. And, I think people are really going to love it.
Yeah, we're excited. I already ordered mine, of course. And you know what? You said you would sign it. So I'm going to send you a message to sign my book. Because I didn't in the.
Well, that's very generous, and I recognize when your payment came in, man. And I think I also mentioned that the first kind of 500 orders, I've got a couple little, just little tchotchke things, little things, but I think you'll dig what they are.
That reminds me. That reminds me of something that you probably want to plug. Let me grab this. Hold on. That you, like me, collect picks.
Wow. Nice.
Those are mine. So talk about this, your picks thing.
Okay. Excellent, man. I'll try to be brief here.
Okay.
So I start interviewing in right around 73. So for some reason, whenever I interviewed somebody, I wanted two things. I wanted a picture with that person, and I wanted their guitar pick. I was a guitar player. I don't know what that fascination was, but I was fascinated by guitar picks. So up until, and I'm not sure exactly when, I'd say 76, 77, you never had logo guitar picks, right? You never had a pick before, 76 that said Van Halen on it.
Right.
It was just a generic Fender or a Gibson or a Herco, the raised surfaces. So I was collecting all these picks, and they were just, like I said, Fenders or Gibson picks, Diodarios, and I just loved collecting them. I was getting them right from the artist. Mm-hmm. And so I it's so stupid, man, just kill me. I would write on a little piece of paper who the pick belonged to. And I kind of tape it to the guitar pick. And we all know you're not supposed to put tape on a guitar pick, moron. But that didn't stop me. So I put them all in this little box that I had. And then fast forward many years, I thought, hey, you know what? I want to do like you did. I want to display them like a little poster board. I want to put them up. I'm going to type a little, label whose pick they were. So I open it up, and what do I find? I find 50 generic Fender, Gibsons, and Diodario picks. All of the labels had fallen off because the tape dried out, and I now am stuck looking at this. Oh my God, you freaking moron. Luckily, some of them were still attached. In 75, I wrote a story called The Picks of Rock and Roll for Guitar Player. And that was, I want to say, was maybe the first time that sort of the art of guitar collecting has sort of been recognized sort of on a national level in a national magazine. I'm not saying I started the hobby of guitar pick collecting. That's insane. But I think it was the first time, at least that I've seen, that anybody has sort of devoted, any space in a major mag, especially a guitar player, which is kind of the Bible back in the day for guitar players, devoted to guitar picks collecting. So I was collecting guitar picks over the years. About 5 years ago, I thought, hey, you know what? I kind of, I've had my collection. I think I'm ready to kind of let go of my collection. Maybe I could buy some other collections. I bought a couple collections, and I've been selling on eBay for the last 5 years. And it's been pretty amazing. I mean, there are some hardcore guitar pick collectors. In fact, some of Ed's early guitar picks, that go for tons of money. Mm-hmm. And it's just an unbelievable kind of subculture that exists out there. What makes me insane is that I'd go up to Ed's studio and there would be 1,000 guitar picks lying on the floor. And not only did I never ask him for a guitar pick, I never even took one off the floor or in an ashtray or sitting in a pile of rubbish.
Right.
I mean, I just never did that, Right. So it's been fun. And actually, I guess about the last about 3 years, I've sort of been what I would call semi-retired. I really don't do much writing anymore, other than the book. That's all kind of been supplanted by, kind of selling picks on eBay and, selling picks privately to guys. Yeah, man, it's been pretty fun. I had a pretty amazing collection of those original picks. I had a couple of Clapton's picks. Again, I'd never interviewed him. This is before I was even writing. But I went and saw Derek and the Dominoes in '71, and, back in the day, you could sort of sneak up on stage. So I think I snuck up, and grabbed a couple of picks off his amp, got a Jimi Hendrix pick.
Wow, awesome.
I've never interviewed Hendrix, but, a lot of guys I did interview, Blackmore and Billy Gibbons. I mean, these are early, and these picks are pretty rare, pretty valuable.
So they can find you on Instagram, right? That's where you do that, or you do eBay, but Instagram.
Yeah. Instagram. I think it's Steve Rosen guitar picks.
Okay.
I think period.
Yeah.
I just use that name. Yeah, that's more where I kind of I talk about the guitar pick thing, and guitar pick collectors will more than generally contact me there.
I was thinking there was a no, this is I want to say the 80s or early 90s. There was a spread where they did a bunch of picks like you're talking about, but this is more personalized picks were more a thing, and they had a central.
Right, that was Jazz Obrecht's.
Okay,
that was Jazz's collection.
Okay, I remember
the picks he had collected over the years. Yeah. What makes me crazy is I wish I could have bought that collection.
He sold that collection?
But it was years before I started collecting, or it's like, he had some fantastic picks.
Wow, man!
And I actually talk about Jazz in the book.
Do you?
We never really knew each other, but I know we had a great respect for each other. Jazz was there from the beginning, and the Day on the Green, and although I never ran into him there actually, but our paths kind of cross sort of writing wise, and I cover that in the book. I think it's a pretty interesting story.
That's why I think the movie should be Day on the Green, man, because it should start with you guys at the Day on the Green, and go from there, and maybe go back to the clubs. But
but that was certainly Van Halen's, like you said, that was not only their first festival, that was their first big gig away from, Bon Jovi, Black Sabbath, Journey and Montrose. So, they were getting grief because, hey, they were only getting no sound check, and they were getting, 25 minutes on stage. And when that offer came up to play Down the Green, they said, fuck yeah, we'll do that, And I talked to Ed about that, and what that was like, playing with AC/DC, who Edward loved, and Journey and Foreigner. I mean, huge bands, much bigger than Van Halen at the time. And what did that feel like? And his responses are pretty amazing. But yeah, that was a pivotal day.
Yeah,
it was definitely a pivotal day for those guys.
I think that's a good place to close. Man, I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and I want to say thank you for all that you've done to let us guitar geeks, get our even more of our Edward Van Halen from your, inside your eyes for the 20 years you were with it, man. We I know that the other guys have said the same thing, and we really appreciate your efforts and all the stuff you've done over the years. And, you like everybody who's doing their thing, they don't really always feel like, that they're doing that much, but you did a lot, man. So, we are indebted to you for all those interviews and for all that stuff we can go back and relive, that you've already put out there, plus this book.
Well, thank you, man. That means everything to me, because at the time that I'm writing that stuff, I'm trying to write a great story, but you have no sense of what it's really going to mean to somebody, or mean so many years later. And the fact that I'm, still part of that dialogue, it's like, okay, I did something right. I captured a thing, and people are responding to it. And I'm so touched by that. You have no idea. And I think when you read the book, man, you'll really you'll really get this understanding of who Edward was and who I was as well, I think.
I can't wait to read it, man.
I thank you, man.
Thank you for your time, man.